Do you want to know how someone with a finance background starts a software company? Not just a software company, but a clinical trial FP&A and accrual management company. Allow me to welcome Jan Kyle, CEO of Condor Software, to our little mini-series. I'm Slava Burdman, Life Science Planning Advisor. And my spare time, I also support ABFO Boston Chapter Membership and Events Coordination, hence our call today. So hello, Jan.
Hey, Slava. Appreciate hosting this and pleasure to see you again.
Awesome. Very nice. So we have limited time. So let me go through a few questions, and they're not meant to answer everything, but hopefully we'll highlight for our listeners and for the attendees of our upcoming ABFO Boston Winter Social, a little bit about Condor, a little bit about you. So let's start from the beginning. How did you decide to change your well laid out career path from an auditor with a direct line to the CFO track and decided to become an entrepreneur?
That's funny. This is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but if you follow your heart and you follow your passion, everything else falls into place. But you can barely or rarely ever predict how that's going to happen. And my journey was anything but linear. I had made very many strategic moves along my journey to round out my breadth of experience to be a very successful CFO. And on that journey, I kept getting pulled towards more creative ways of fixing processes, being creative, impacting change. And I realized along my accounting journey, I was more of a maverick accountant where if I saw something that was broken, I would want to fix it. I think doing anything in a status quo way that seemed to waste time or didn't make sense just got under my skin. And I really wanted to drive meaningful change across the organizations that I personally worked inside of. I really thrived working with different teams. And, typically in accounting, you stay in your lane, you work, you peek your head up every month end to go make certain confirmations, but it's not really collaborative space. And we'd always joke, like the accountants would always get pushed in a closet in the back of a room where nobody would talk to them, right? And I didn't want to do that. It's funny, when we had confirmations, sending out requests to project managers or legal, I would actually walk to the office. This was days before COVID, and go say hello and then get the confirmation and ask them to follow up on an email. Just an example of not wanting to follow the normal path. And the realization that I loved working with different teams. I loved data. Like, I wanted data to predict how we can make better decisions. And I tried implementing that across every role that I had in my career. I think that realization left me to say, I'm not meant to be a CFO, but I don't know what I'm meant to do. It was a very unknown time. And I go back to what I had said originally, follow your passion. I was passionate about so many things. And we all know in accounting and finance, we've got a backlog of projects that we need to do, right? Company improvements. There's never any time to do it in the day-to-day. It's just you can never find it. And so I figured, hey, this is what I love to do. There's every company that I know has a backlog of these initiatives. Why don't I just go consult on my own and go solve these problems? At least along that pursuit, I think I thought that I would find what I was meant to do. And that's how it happened. I took a leap of faith. I got off the 9-to-5 path where I knew exactly where my paycheck was coming from. And I said, if I just do a really good job, help these companies, then something will unfold and I'll be a lot happier doing it. And I never would have guessed that being a software developer entrepreneur was ever on that path.
It's got to be crazy scary. I mean, now, since you're many years into the journey, everything kind of falls into places and starts to make sense. And I think in hindsight, right, you can justify a lot of decisions you made and you know and why you made them and how you made them. But when you look ahead into the journey, it had to be scary. It-
Oh, I did a lot of interpersonal work on being comfortable with discomfort, the unknown, right? Everything about accounting, especially accounting, right, is certainty. It's knowing what needs to be done. It's knowing that if I the cause and effect, if I do this, then this effect is going to follow. And going out there into the unknown territory, you really just have to take a leap of faith and in your gut feel that this is the right thing to do and kind of just trust, the universe. I know that's going to sound woo woo, but you got to just kind of trust the universe that it's all going to fall into place and you can never predict how.
well, again, from somebody who was a finance background, we are trained, right, not to trust, quote unquote. We're trained to look for certainty, proof, validation, confirmation, consistency, all the traits that are opposite of diving off the cliff into the entrepreneurial territory. But you did it, you're there, and it's terrific. I think it's great. I think for a lot of people in the field, in the accounting finance field, to know that you can do it. There is more than one path, right? And I think it's terrific. And speaking of sort of more than one path, in your auditing life, in your auditing days, right? There's many problems you're solving. I understand that, and we talked about the clinical trial and the clinical finance to be particularly interesting and challenging. But what made you pick that problem as a opportunity that your software company will solve?
Yeah, this is the beauty of it, of what I said earlier, just trusting the universe it's going to unfold. I didn't choose this. I didn't pick it. I didn't say, here's the target I want to hit. I'm going to go after it. I instead followed what I was passionate about and what I was really good at. And it was solving problems at the intersection of operations, finance, and accounting, right? The things that you need to be good at to solve to solve the finance backlog of issues in any organization, frankly. And when I took that leap of faith, I got a phone call the very next week from a biotech company. And I should say that, it wasn't like I just took a leap of faith and waited and nothing happened, right? I had a big network. I talked to everybody that I knew and told them that I was out doing this and I wanted to consult and just help. And word got around. So the biotech company called me, and they were struggling with clinical accruals and forecasting. This was a first year 404B, so the company was going through some high growth and some compliance transition, and they were facing frequent material adjustments every quarter, right? And you can get away with it in a 404A as long as you write it by the end of the year. But stepping into a 404B, the fact that you're making these adjustments is says that you have an issue with your process, right? And nobody wants to go into a significant deficiency in the first year of being 404B. So their VP of finance interviewed me to come in and solve this problem. And, I took, again, a very unconventional path. When I went and worked with them, I did not work in the finance and the accounting team, even though I reported to the VP of finance at the time. And I was the consultant for the finance team. It was kind of like undercover finance, right? I said, look, I know what you guys do. I know what you need. That's clear. What I don't know is a lot of how clinical operations operates. That's something that I need to go investigate further. And I'm going to go work with them. And so when I worked closely with ClinOps, I was, again, very fortunate to have a ClinOps team that treated me as one of their own. I had access to the softwares, the databases they were using, firsthand knowledge of how they manage the CROs and the vendors. It was a great experience. And when I dug into it, I realized, three key insights. The first was the problem was much simpler than it appeared to be. The only complexity was around the volume of data and the constant changes within clinical trials and how those impacted the hundreds or thousands of contracts that you have in your entire budget and your accruals. But the problem wasn't complicated in nature. The second was there was a gold mine of data. Like I uncovered, patient visits, dosing levels. I mean, so much information that the accounting and finance teams, especially accounting, didn't know. I remember going back to the VP of finance, and I'm like, we have all of this EDC data. And she smiled. She's like, it's great. What is an EDC? So, I think, we weren't tapping into all of this data. And then the third was there was a big disconnect. Working with the clinical operations team, I kind of understood how they thought about managing the vendors in the clinical trials. But as they communicated to accounting and finance and vice versa, that was lost in translation. So the third issue, the insight that I saw was really a language barrier. So if you can simplify the process, capture that data to effectively use it, and break down the language barriers, you can effectively solve the problem. And that's what we did. And then after bridging those gaps and seeing that transformation firsthand, I realized this is a pretty widespread issue. And I kept getting called from all of these other biotech companies to come do the same thing over and over. And so after quite a few of those instances, I looked in software to see if something would replace my spreadsheet, because surely I wasn't the only human that had uncovered this. And there was nothing. I talked to big pharma organizations. I talked to small biotech companies. I mean, I scoured the industry looking, there's gotta be something. And what I learned was big pharma built databases, small biotechs just did whatever ClinOps told them to do. And that created a mess for audit, a mess even going from company to company, different processes, different people. And when it kept being asked of me to automate the solution more and more, and seeing nothing else was in the market, I said, well, if I don't do this, somebody else is going to do it, right?
Absolutely.
I thought this is, Jen, this is one thing that if I don't do this, if I don't go after it 10 years, 15, 20 years down the line, when there's $1 billion company that solved this problem and I didn't do it, that's going to be the biggest regret in my life. So.
When we met at the Scope conference a couple of weeks ago, right? You remember the football field worth of vendor booth, and a lot of the different problems and one-off unique problems are solved, but nowhere in that field did I actually see solutions, right? The FP&A solutions to the clinical finance. And I second your opinion. It's kind of interesting that it's been many years since you started Condor, and it still hasn't been massively addressed other than maybe Condor and a few of your competitors now. But it's not a crowded field at all. So, which
No,
kind
you
of,
know what?
yeah.
Yeah, what's funny about that, Slava, is years ago I had created these workbooks, right? And it was in the pursuit of standardization. How do we standardize this? And use it across the industry, because that's how you build software. So many different companies, consulting firms had a derivative of my workbook. And so all of the solutions that you see on the market today actually were born from that workbook years ago. So I
You
would
should
say,
have patented that
I
if you could. Yeah, you can't patent the spreadsheet, but
you can patent a spreadsheet, but I'd say that I'm grateful. There's going to be more solutions in the market, and I'm excited for that, because this is a very underserved market, and it's about time.
you brought something up, and I think you've been overly modest when you said, "Look, it's not a extremely complicated problem. It's just voluminous, right? There's a lot of data." But in my own experience supporting a few companies with sort of quote unquote clinical trial spreadsheets, right? I've discovered very quickly that a lot of time the problem isn't the technical calculation. It isn't really a fairly complicated gap analysis of what the accrual is supposed to look like, cost recognition, all of that. it's all the other problems that go with it. It's the process, it's the people, it's the availability of the data, it's data incompleteness, right? We don't have the data. And a lot of times when we ask, the answer is, well, we'll get it to you next month, so, soon, and it never comes anyway. So as you build a software that supposedly solve a technical problem by design, I'm imagining you must deal with all the other elements of this, right? The process, the people, the data availability, data accuracy, etc. Can you talk a little bit about how Condor deals with that on a software service, etc. side?
Yeah, you touched on a few things there that make it very complicated. And I remember, as you were saying that, Slava, one instance when I was consulting for a company, and I had worked for dozens of companies at this time. I remember I struggled to get information from an IRT and from the EDC from the data managers of the biotech company. And had it not been for the experience that I had and like said, Suvoda, here's what I need. Here's all of the columns that I need. And like walking in his office and partnering with him, there's no way the accounting team would have been able to get that information. So again, it's like the language barrier and dealing with so many different stakeholders, data managers being one of them. And I think, that's widespread in the industry. And so what I think most folks don't know that haven't met me or know of Condor is there were several years we were in stealth working in these workbooks for good reason, because you have to develop a consistent framework and you have to be able to understand, the most challenging stakeholders in the organization and also the different vendors you're working with, right? The reporting from IQVIA is actually going to be different between one person on IQVIA and another person on IQVIA, right? And how you're being audited, even if you're audited by Ernst and Young, right? It's funny, like you'd have one auditor that's going to ask you to show specific documentation, and then another auditor in the same firm in the same office city is going to have a completely different way of auditing, right? And so again, from like my background of operations and accounting and finance, you can't build software if everything is so customized and piecemeal coming in. You have to first foundationally build a framework and consistency and standardization as much as possible. Then you can build software on top of that framework, which then sets the stage for very scalable, good quality software that works. So, when and the first thing when I was going into figure out a way to standardize it, the first thing that I went to was the accounting guidance, right? Accounting guidance for clinical accruals. Okay, what is a way we're supposed to be doing this? And I'm sure many accountants on here are going to know, are going to understand and empathize. There's virtually nothing out there. It basically
It,
says everything has to be expensed unless
yeah,
you can say that there's an alternative future use, right? Which is like
yeah.
a area. So, um, you know,
Except it doesn't tell you how. It just says it must. So that's the inconsistency part, is that everybody interprets that statement in the way they understood it, in the way their historical background suggests to them.
yeah,
This is where the vendor-based accruals are coming in. This is where the legacy we're dealing with, and where your advocacy for the industry is so important, right? When you actually setting the standards that don't exist.
yeah. So what I had done was, and I work with the auditors on this. I worked with them for many years to create best practices and to create standards, which we've done. And we use an activity-based approach, right? So you can basically dissect or not dissect, but you can basically um, synthesize all of the clinical trial activities by an element of they're going to change based on enrollment, they're going to change based on site activity, or by timeline, right? And there's always that 5% that like we don't know how to do. Okay, forget about that. So
Right.
I would focus on the materiality and I would say, how do we predict our own costs? How do we control our finances? How do we control our unit trackers? How much we're recording? And then we're going to check that against these vendors. versus waiting for our vendors to come and tell us how much we owe, right? And I had to get on board with this activity-based approach and get the auditors on board and show them that this method was much better than asking somebody, are we 30% complete or 50% complete? Because if you ask the same person for a
Right.
percent complete, they're going to have two different definitions of what that means.
Let's not get too technical because we can probably record a separate hour on just the technicality of that accrual calculation and dealing with that, what you call 5% factor, right? Because you have a default, and of course, when auditors look at it, they look at it in hindsight. So they always question your own logic against the reality, which you don't have at the time you're making the accrual. So again, it's a technical problem that is particularly unique to the clinical trials, but let's save it maybe for a
Yeah.
follow-up. Uh, in what's clear is that you're not solving just a gap problem. You're not solving just accounting technicality problem. You're connecting the dots, right? So you're talking with the functions. You basically need, in a way, to establish a process if it doesn't exist. So can you maybe briefly share how much of the company, if you look at the overall Condor or if you look at the service agreements that you sign with people, how much of that is a software and the technical solution versus a service and a process solution?
I wouldn't say it's not either or. I think part of Condor, the the process that we have is built into the software. It was taking like my head of what we had done for so many years across so many different organizations and building out a software that's built around that framework. So I think for us, when we go into organizations and we sign with customers, it's not just here's a software solution. Of course, that is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But when we provide services, so when we start with like the software implementation, you can think about it as like a process improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So go through, we improve your process, we connect the dots, we get everybody aligned. It's our job to make sure that that you guys are getting the right data from your right stakeholders. We'll step in to make sure that happens. And then once we load everything into the software, it pretty much just runs itself. And I don't mean by having people behind the software pushing stuff. I mean, it's all automated
Right.
within software.
No, it's great because a lot of time people voice that issue of their own maturity as a blockage. So even, in my early days when I was just giving the spreadsheet solutions to clinical trial problem, a lot of time people would say, well, we don't have a process, we don't understand it, we haven't established it, we're not ready for anything. And I think what you said is important for people to know, right? It's Condor is not just we come in, we, unwrap a shrink wrap into your servers, into your environment, and walk away. Like you actually start with helping them get to the point where they can plug the software and start doing the process changes, etc. So no, this is great for them to know. I'm glad we touched on that. I, in the interest of time, and I know there's so many questions we can dive in, but there's something that everyone talks about in the last year at least, right? And how that magic two letters, right? AI fixes everything, changes everything, makes everything free, right? And sort of not complex anymore. And every software we know adds the powered by AI in the bottom of it, right? Whether they do or don't, it's sort of irrelevant. It's sort of a must, two letters that must be stamped and everything. You're a CEO of a software company. Clearly, you deal with AI. So can you share with our audience, what's your take on it? How you use it? What's today versus future/tomorrow for Condor AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm excited personally about AI. I mean, it's here and it's evolving rapidly. Um, we see its promise, but we're also mindful, especially with my background of the regulatory oversight from the FASB and PCOB, and it has not yet caught up. Right? They're still figuring out how they're gonna get comfortable with AI being used for accounting. So we've set pretty clear boundaries in our AI strategy and our roadmap. First, I'd say number one, for any solution on the market for clinical trial finance and accrual, there is no mature AI right now. There's no AI powered by AI with contract OCR. All of that is BS, frankly. It's it's humans behind a computer tagging information and then saying powered by AI. Okay. So for accounting, where we see accuracy is critical, compliance is critical, we are using AI to automate the workflows and detect errors. And what I mean by that is triggering auto run by your data, bringing it in, doing the automatic reconciliation and flagging for variances, right? You still need a human to review the numbers. And even on the contract ingestion, you need a human to review that because there's the technology yet is not there to just be able to magically bring in a CTA and it's populated in the software. It will be there, and I'm
Yeah.
excited. We're working on that for that to happen, but it's not here yet.
I've
Um,
heard,
yeah.
I've heard, no, I apologize for interrupting, but there's a consumer AI, right? The Chat GPTs and the Gemini, et cetera, which works well for as a basic assistant. It can, review the contract with you, et cetera. But what I've been told is that the difference between a consumer AI at this basic level and a production strength foundation of a software where AI actually does the work, a humongous investment is required. It's not simple self-extracting, package. It's a lot of work, a lot of money. So, is Condor working toward that? Like, are you guys making that investments, or are you kind of waiting for the consumer AI to step up to that plate?
So I would say, and this maybe from my technology background, so the consumer AI is a large language model, right?
Hmm.
It's basically it's a person that's going to Google for you, right? And
Yep.
it give you the search results, and be able to form paragraphs. So a large language model can be very useful for flux explanations, right? Why
Hmm.
did something happen? But again, that model needs training. So you can't just flip on a switch. Before Chat GPT came out and all of the other ones, it was years of putting some algorithms together to train to say, what are we seeing? How do we respond? And learning off that model. So for us, the other thing I didn't mention is for AI, and this lends into this type machine learning
Hmm.
on the FP&A side, right? I'm really excited about the machine learning for budgeting and forecasting, scenario planning, benchmarking. This is where, and again, because of how Condor's software was set up and how we tag everything and being a multi-tenant environment, we're actually able to learn from all of these models and to say, okay, this activity is correlated to enrollment, and this is what we're seeing by each CRO. So being able to bridge the clinical data, the financial contracts, and make those meaningful connections and learn over and over to predict the cost and to be able to predict your forecasting and even new budgeting. That's something that we're really proud of because our models right now are over 95% accuracy on forecasting
Hmm.
for clinical trials, right? So now we're learning and we're doing what happens if there's a new clinical trial. What does that look like? Learning from the models that we have. So this is where I draw a line in the sand and say accounting, the AI that we're going to be using for you is going to be workflow automation. How do we just make things easier? But for FP&A, how do we predict with more
Right.
accuracy quicker?
So you use the AI from a predictive side versus the interpretive side on the actuals. Makes total sense. I can see where it could be hugely beneficial, especially as the company scales up and your data sets and your customer base, et cetera, starts to grow, and you start getting the data that you can utilize for other clients, obviously without unmasking, but to use that large data sets to build predicting models. So all right, let's switch to something a little bit lighter, so we don't deep dive into a light conversation, off the light conversation. But you and I talked about it on the weekend. I actually had to look up some of the videos of the glorious bird named Condor, And you and I talked in the past a little bit about how you actually had that inspiration and experience. Can you tell in your own words how did that inspiration and the name and how that actually influence where the company direction and strategy is going?
Yeah, so back to the beginning of our call, Slava. You kind of asked how did I become an entrepreneur, right? And why clinical accruals? Taking that leap of faith, identifying that there was this problem and it needed to be solved, and I was in the right place with the right at the right time with the right experience, uniquely positioned to be able to solve it. It was a pivotal moment. And I had talked to an investor that said, "Yeah, you should definitely pursue this, build out software." But before you do, be warned that it is going to take your blood, sweat, tears, and soul from you. Like, this is a lifelong commitment you are getting into. And I was like, that's a that's a big ask, man. That's even more scary than just going out to consult, right? Like, do I really want to do this? Because I could either be really successful or fail really miserably. Um, I had a family at the time. I still have a family, but
The risk factor is X,
yes.
exponential to the consulting, which is very dynamic and quick.
So I had a trip planned to Peru to go hike Machu Picchu. And I said, you know what? I'm going on this trip in a couple of weeks. Let me go meditate on this. Let me go think about it. Let me go sit with it and see if this really is like my calling, my purpose, my passion. This is something that I should do because it is going to be a life-changing event and experience. And so while I was on this trip, I was inspired. Just for anybody that has not been to Machu Picchu, go book a trip. I mean, it's one of the seven wonders of the world for a reason. And I was highly inspired by the Inca people, the tribes. Do some research there, but the Condor especially. And the Condor, there's a lot of meaning behind what the Condor represents and what's gone into the core foundation and principles into our product and our company as a whole. The first is that the Condor was known to deliver messages from the gods, from the divine to the people on the world. And, for us, we bridge that communication. So we want to transcend these industry silos and deliver the vital information to the stakeholders that need it, right? That's been part of our ethos. So being a messenger. The second is the wingspan. So if you recall earlier on, I was looking for software and I found bits and pieces, right? Like metadata to site payments, and they would market, they do financial accruals. And I was so excited. There was a company that did financial accruals for clinical trials, only to find out it was for only investigator fees, right? I'm like, well, what about the CRO costs? What about the labs? What about all these other things? They're like, oh no, we don't do it. And so the wingspan of a condor is the largest wingspan of all of the birds. And that stands for being able to look at your entire clinical budget, your programs, and calculate every single cost, the CRO costs, the CMC costs, the you name it, the site fees, the everything, labs. And we have to cover the breadth of everything. So the wingspan represents how much comprehensively Condor covers. The third is they're the highest flying birds and they have 20/20 vision. So we needed to see a clear view of what is the 30,000-foot strategic view. What does that view look like if I'm looking at the landscape over everything, right? That even goes in some of our benchmarks. But then I want to drill in. So going to that detail, right? If my average patient costs 150,000, well, what does that mean? I need to break it down and keep breaking it down all the way to the average site cost per geography. And this can be in accounting, right? If I'm off by 20%, let's keep drilling and drilling and drilling until I see what suite of transactions make up that,
Mhm.
right? The height and the eyesight. And then the fourth is the lifespan. So they live about 75 years. It's the longest living bird. And that is longevity for human life, longevity for condor, and it reflects our commitment to the long-term partnerships that we have with all of our customers and with the other industry leaders to make a lasting impact for biotech and pharma. So one day we'll put this up on our website, but everything that we do is really connected to what the Condor represents and is foundational on how we think about our product, how we think about our technology and our relationships with our partners and our customers.
The bird is magnificent, but I also love the inspirational side of your story because, especially on the accounting side, right? We tend to get sometimes mechanical, sometimes sort of de-emotionalized, the process and the work itself. So inspiration is important. You have to be inspired with a bigger, grandier vision of what we're accomplishing than just a specific task at hand, because that's what gives you the compass, right? That's what gives you direction. This is terrific. Uh, as we wrap it up, unfortunately, we have it amazingly, it's this week, right? So we have the ABFO Boston Winter Social event this Thursday. And I know you guys with Condor are sponsoring it. You're raffling a few prizes for the attendees. I know you've been a member and a long time supporter of the organization before, obviously, your CEO position when you started on the accounting side. So you will be attending. I'm very excited to see you there. And maybe a quick question is, what would you like to accomplish? What can organization do for Condor? What can the members expect when they go to this event and they meet you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, what can they expect? Um, have fun, meet people, connect, have a good time. We're always serious at work, like let's let loose and have a little fun. And that's what I really love about the ABFO organization, both as a member before starting Condor and as a sponsor. But we are going to be giving away some tickets, and the reason why we're giving away tickets is really giving back into the community. First and foremost, what I love about ABFO is you get to build authentic relationships. And I know that it's pretty hard for folks sometimes to network and expand their horizons. Um, and this year, the national conference is going to be in San Diego. I know that it is very hard for folks that's on the East Coast to make the trip all the way across the continent. And what I want to do, what Condor wants to do, is pay for a couple or a few of those trips, right? So for anybody that is, really keen, really wants to network, wants to be part of the organization and just see sunny San Diego because it's a great place to be, but doesn't have the budget for attending the conference, either within their organization, or on their own, we'll go ahead and sponsor those costs. And really for that, there's no catch. We're going to give you a ticket to go out there. We just hope that you make one new friend, one new connection, because I would say full circle, right? Coming back, I don't think that Condor would even exist today without the ABFO organization and the network that I had when I went to go out and to consult, right? when I told my network I was on the market to just consult and solve problems, the first place I went to was a lot of the folks that I knew from the ABFO Association.
Absolutely. And I work with CFOs a lot. Basically, all my consulting career, I work with CFOs. And it's almost always the first thing I check and I recommend is, are you a member? And if the answer is no, which is still true amazingly for about half of the people I work with on the CFO, the CFOs of life science, my next statement is you must be a member because this organization is incredibly supportive, and it is like a family. Like you learn, you build a very long lasting relationship. It's a tight knit community. Effectively, we all know each other, and being a member of that is the easiest, the most efficient way to actually get support and help your colleagues and your friends. So I'm glad you guys, the Condor, is supporting it. I think it's very noble to help people with the travel to San Diego. It's always second next favorite place, no matter where I lived. I lived in Boston. It was my second favorite place. Now I live in Florida. It's my still my second favorite place to visit and to be. So I'm very excited about the summer national conference. I got my ticket and my registration done, which I recommend to everybody else do as soon as you can. So, Jen, this is terrific. I think we got to wrap it up at this point, if that's okay with you. It was
Yeah.
great to talk to you, and I'm very excited to see you on Thursday at the the winter social.
Yeah, I'm happy to be there. It's going to be cold in Boston, but we'll have fun.
We always do. Excellent. We'll talk later.
All
Bye.
right. Thanks, Slava.
Thank you.